Hello and welcome to Conversations with BendFilm Festival. I'm Beth Jasper, the Associate Documentary Film Programmer. And today I'd like to introduce you to our guest, Nick Brandestini, who is the director of the documentary film Sapelo. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nick. And because you are joining us from Zurich, let's be clear about that.
That's correct.
We appreciate that. Okay, so speaking of that, you live in Zurich in Switzerland, and your film takes place in the US in Georgia. Okay, so that's a long way to travel, and talk to us, if you would, about how this film actually came to be.
Okay, so it's actually my third feature-length documentary, and coincidentally, my previous two were also took place in the US. And so I was always interested in communities or ways of life that are different from me, different from people living here in a relatively big city, such as Zurich. And so a few years ago, I was driving through the desert in California, and I loved the landscape and the environment and the heat. And I noticed that there's people living here, to my surprise, like in the middle of nowhere, in very small little houses. And so this is how it started. My interest in communities in the US. So I did a first documentary about a place called DARWIN that has 35 people living there. And so it was very interesting to me to get to know them and to portray them in my very first documentary called DARWIN. And so that was a good experience for me, and the people who were in the film responded very positively to the film. And so I decided to do a second film in the US because that just was such a good experience. I thought I should maybe repeat that. And so I went to the northernmost town in the US, which is Barrow, Alaska. And I did a portrait of the Alaska Native community there. And that was called Children of the Arctic. And I'm still in contact with the people from Darwin and Barrow. And it's just been wonderful for me to get to know people from different parts of the world. So far from the US only, I may do different community portraits in other places around the world. But I wanted to do a third one in a similar way. And so this is how I found Sapelo. I thought maybe I should have a look at the southern part of the US. Maybe there's some interesting places there that I could learn more about. And so that's how this all started.
So you kind of looked at a map and you saw Georgia.
A little bit, yes. It sounds a little dumb, but that's how it started, at least. And of course, I'm not interested in just any place. It has to be something there that intrigues me, like a different interesting history, people who have interesting things to say. And so I started to research places in Louisiana. I went there. I didn't find anything, but I met an elderly Black lady there who we started just talking, and it turned out she was a genealogist. And I told her I'm a documentary filmmaker, and she says, "Oh, have you heard of the Gullah Geechee people? They're not here in Louisiana, but they're over on the coast in Georgia." And I told her, "No, I've never heard of them." And so she was very helpful for me to connect me with people there. And so one thing led to the next. And so I found a place in Georgia called Geechee Kunda, which was a museum or a cultural center. And the person there, the guy who runs it, found it interesting that somebody from Switzerland would come all the way and was interested in learning more about Geechee culture. And so he made it possible for me to visit Sapelo, which is relatively close by. And that's where I met the main character, Cornelia, for the very first time.
So you met her and you decided just after talking with her that this was going to be the story. This was going to be the place, right?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, I didn't want to film right away because as an outsider, you don't want to just come in and go like this and, annoy people. But I just wanted to talk with her, and luckily we got along very well right away. And I was still trying to find out where this film could go, because didn't want it to make it about one person, only one person, but Cornelia was such a source of information, and she actually wrote a book called God, Dr. What's it called? God, Buzzard, and the Bolido Man.
Right.
And so I read her book, and it talks about her growing up on the island in the 50s. And I read the book. I spoke with her about her life on the island. And then I ran into her adopted kids. They call her grandma, but because they're, you know, very young, but she actually adopted them. And so that's Jonathan and Marcus, who are in the film. So once I met them and JJ, the third brother, I thought it would be interesting to focus on that family and follow their life on the island. And while doing that, you know, telling the stories of the people living there and her background growing up on the island.
Well, this is really an amazing film. I'm interested, you wove the story together so well. I mean, it was just beautiful. It was like a quilt. That's what it made me think of, you know, just all the different things about it. So in addition to directing, you also shot it and edited this film. And that seems to make the story more personal to the audience, I think. What was it like to shoot there and because you must have spent a lot of time there because the kids, you know, grow up, things happen. So talk to us about what that was like and how many times did you have to go back there?
Yes, I mean, I think it was 10 times all in all. And I would go there 10 days each and then go back to Zurich and put the stuff together. And I would work with my collaborator, Taylor Segrist, who we would discuss how to shape the film, because you never know, at least in the way I work, I don't have a plan at the beginning because it's real life. I don't know what's going to happen. So I just follow whatever I encounter and however things develop. And so I would just come back every few months and I would announce to Cornelia and her family, I would like to come back. And luckily they were very happy. To me, this was a pleasant surprise. When I came back, they would say, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see you again." And I would stay on the island and just follow what was happening. And yeah, that's how it went.
Well, you're really lucky that they liked you because you were on a very small island with not that many people. So it would have been difficult afterwards, right?
I mean, it takes a lot of time to gain the trust of people, because I understand that if somebody comes from the outside, and they actually call them outsiders, and especially if somebody is there with a camera. I mean, I would be a bit hesitant of people just coming in and then just filming right away. So what I did, I was just telling them about my background and just spending time with Cornelia, talking with her without the camera, and following the brothers on the island, what they were doing, exploring the place. And they would even film me, from time to time. And, after a while, I felt confident enough to film more and more and do interviews with them. And but you have to just be patient. And the filming was like over a period of 1.5, 2 years.
Well, I loved your photography. It was so amazing, and the music you had, and those two together, it's such a beautiful film. What do you think was the most difficult part of filming, of doing this film?
Ooh, the most difficult part. I think during the editing, because then like you mentioned that it's like a quilt. And that's, of course, the idea as a filmmaker. You want to put something together that makes sense and that leads from one thing to the next. And it was a challenge to shape the movie, because you cannot go in and you don't have a screenplay that you can write. So you just have to take what you encounter in real life. And so I think one of the things my collaborator Taylor and I came up with was to introduce the narration with Cornelia, that she talks about her growing up on the island, and then to compare this with the brothers growing up on the island today, and just to find this shape or form of the film, I think was the most challenging.
So you followed the family for a very long time, and they suffered a lot of losses. How did you capture each of these on camera in general?
You have like a specific example? Or what,
Well,
when
I
you
know it's
capture?
difficult when you're in a sad situation or a hard situation, you know, with the people that you're following. And sometimes it's difficult, you know, to film that. And sometimes it's difficult for them to want you to film, you know, that. So how did you work with that?
Yes, that's a very good question. Of course, I'm always very hesitant, and because the film should not be, I don't want it to be exploitive and showing people's, sadness and problems. But at the same time, I do want to show real life, what's happening. So I try to bring this across in a subtle and compassionate way. So I just, if there's a sad moment in the film, I just try to, just to feel what can I ask, for example, in an interview, and what is totally inappropriate. And I think just spending enough time with people, gaining their trust to a point, and me knowing what I can say, you feel when the moment is right to ask more tough questions. But
Right.
you just have to be very patient. I think that's the best way to do it.
Patience is the key, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I wanted to mention the really amazing narration that you had. It kind of reminded me of To Kill a Mockingbird, the film. Um, how did you decide to do that and why?
I think it started with when I read Cornelia's book. There's a lot of nice stories that she would also tell people who would visit her, and they're also written down in her book. And they talk about her life on the island growing up. And there's a lot of descriptions of her just exploring the forest and living in this very nice environment that I loved myself, with all these oak trees and the Spanish moss and the beach and the alligators and all that stuff is so beautifully described in her book. And I wanted to find a way to have her talk about this. And so this is how the narration came about. And we were very lucky to get Bonnie Turpin, who is a very well-respected audiobook narrator and actress, on board to do that narration. And it's also interesting that she was in one of the very famous films about Gullah Geechee culture called Daughters of the Dust. She was
Oh,
one of the actresses in that film. So
wow.
once we found that out, we knew this was perfect.
It was perfect. It was just beautiful.
Oh, thank you so
On the
much.
other hand, so the the wildlife there, we had, was he an alligator or a crocodile? Alligator.
Alligator, yes.
Okay, so you got pretty close to some of those animals and things in the sea. Did that
Yes,
worry you? And the kids got really close to them. How did that all work?
that's just what they do. To me, of course, this was completely foreign. Just the idea of an alligator, just looking at this thing was so outer worldly, because it looks like a creature. Well, it is from millions of years ago. But for the people there, it's just like, because there's so many of them, it's a very common thing. So of course I knew I had to have them in the film. But there were other animals like huge turtles and whales and sharks. There were so many other interesting um, animals and parts of nature that I would love to have been able to include. But you can't, you have to decide during editing what to put in your film, because it's about the people and the history, and it's not in the nature documentary. But the alligator was just too cool to miss.
He looked scary. Wow, that was crazy. Um, so if you could have done anything differently with this documentary, what would that be, if anything?
What a challenging question.
Well, I know sometimes, you get finished and you think, if I'd only done that, did you have any of that kind of feeling?
I'm sure there were a lot of things. I think I just forgot about those. Um, I mean, there's a lot of things that, Cornelia and I would speak for hours and hours in the gazebo, where she would spend a lot of her time reading and talking with people who would visit her. And she told me so many interesting stories about her life and the community, and also how things are changing.
Right.
How there's like more people from the outside moving in. There's a lot of gentrification. And maybe, I mean, I could have incorporated a lot of more of her stories and more of what the current situation is with the how hard it is to keep that community alive for the people living there. But I hope that it does come across in a subtle way, that there's change happening. But it's not the focus of the film. I'm really focusing on Cornelia and her family. But of course, there's so many. I had a lot of scenes that I just had to cut out because I didn't want to make like a 2-hour movie and bore everybody. So I had to, as any documentarian would do, you just have to cut out a lot of things
Exactly.
that you're sad that you have to cut.
Exactly. Well, she is an amazing character, and I for one could have just listened to her like you did, tell story after story. I mean, she was just
You should read
so
her book. Actually, I can recommend her book,
I must.
God, Dr. Polito, and I can't remember the title. God, Husband and the Bolito Man.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to hear more of her stories, you just read her book. It's very good.
That's really neat. Yeah. So speaking of the changes, it was very subtle, but we saw in the film the woman who next door to her, there was going to be a new house, like really close to her house, and then I think later you shot the house was actually almost finished, and it seems to be. It was like, here we have this historical town of people, island of people. And it was a little shocking. I mean, we didn't see the new people, but it just sort of made my heart, go out to the people, because once that starts happening, as we all know, then things change dramatically. So tell us about why you handled it the way you did in terms of filming.
I think I didn't want to there's a lot of other, if you look on YouTube, and there's, by the way, many more Gullah Geechee communities on the coast between like North Carolina all the way down to Florida. And if you look on YouTube, there's some documentaries that go into that thing with the taxes going up, and that forces a lot of people, descendants or people who live there, to have to move because they cannot afford it. And I just didn't want to do a political film. It's not the type of documentaries I do. I like to focus more on like the social aspects of the portraying a community, and just weaving in those topics so people can think about them themselves. Because I don't want to say, because I don't know, it's just not what I do. I hope that people are smart enough to pick up on those problems and think about them, but I don't want to focus too much about it and make it so that we show, there's bulldozers coming in, tearing down everything. I just like to work in a more subtle way. That's just my way of filmmaking.
Well, and I think that works, because as a person watching your film, I appreciated that. I appreciated knowing what was happening, but I didn't need to see all of the other things. So I think you did a really good job.
I don't want to say anything negative about that. It's just a different way of
Sure.
filmmaking. So.
Yeah, and I think it certainly worked in your film. It's just
Thank you.
beautiful. So are you working on a new film? What's happening with you now?
No, to make not yet. I'm still working on getting this film out to more festivals and getting people to see it and learning more about the island. And by the way, if you want to, the audience and yourself want to know more, sapelofilm.com, there's a lot of links.
Mm-hmm.
That also talks about Cornelia's project of, rebuilding the community. There's some links there where you can look into it. But so I'm still focused very much on this project. And I think I'll be open for thinking about a new film, I don't know, maybe half a year from now, but not yet. No.
Documentaries tend to stick with you when you do those.
It's a long journey. Even after the filming is done, I'm still in contact with the people. I've been there twice, even after filming.
Wow.
And so this is not over yet. Then I will stay in contact, as I did with my previous films. I'm still interested in the people and what's happening. So.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today from Switzerland. You're probably the only one I've talked to in Switzerland during this question and answer thing. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for making this film. It is absolutely extraordinary. It's beautiful. The photography, it's just amazing. And hopefully lots and lots of people will see it.
All right, thank you, Beth. And of course, thank you, BendFilm Festival, everybody for watching and their interest in Sapelo. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.